The Smoky Mountains. Horror. Something always follows. It was supposed to be a weekend of adventure. Ethan and Jake had always prided themselves on seeking out the wildest, most remote corners of the Smoky Mountains, places where the trails ended and the wilderness began. But if they'd known what waited for them out there, they never would have left Ohio. By the time they pitched their camp, twilight had already bled into deep shadowed darkness. They chose their spot carefully, tucked beneath towering pines, far from prying eyes and bustling trails. There was no phone service, no sense of civilization, just the kind of still, untouched quiet they always craved on these trips, or so they thought. The evening began like so many others. The fire flickered and popped as they roasted marshmallows, swapping jokes and stories. Laughter filled the air, drowning out the rustles and sounds of the forest. But neither of them noticed when the natural night sounds, the chirp of crickets, the whisper of the wind, faded without warning. Ethan was the first to feel it, a creeping unease slinking up his spine as the fire burned low. "Do you hear that?" he asked, scanning the tree line, his voice sharp in the heavy quiet. Jake frowned, poking at the fire. "What? I don't hear anything." "Exactly," Ethan muttered. That's when the first sound came. It was a low hum, quiet, almost imperceptible. At first, Ethan thought it was his mind playing tricks on him, but the longer he listened, the heavier it felt. Like the air itself thrummed with a deep, unnatural vibration. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't any animal sound he'd ever heard. Jake laughed nervously. "Relax, man. It's probably just the wind in some hollow tree or something." But his laugh was forced, and Ethan could see it in his eyes. The growing fear neither of them wanted to admit. Sometime after midnight, Ethan was startled awake in his sleeping bag. The air in the tent felt wrong, sharp, cold, and heavy, like it pressed down on his chest. At first, he wasn't sure what had woken him until he smelled it. The stench hit like a punch, a putrid mix of decay, metal, and something unnameable. It was nauseating, raising bile in the back of his throat. Then he saw the shadow. It loomed outside the tent, massive, blocking the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy of trees. Its jagged, undulating edges quivered as though it struggled to hold itself together. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to stay frozen, to stay silent. The shadow leaned closer, deliberate, its awareness a physical weight pressing down on him from just beyond the flimsy fabric. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Ethan wasn't sure. His mind jumbled thoughts in messy loops of "don't move, don't make a sound," and just like that, it was gone, silent as smoke. The next morning, Ethan told Jake what happened. "It wasn't an animal. It bent, stared. It knew I was there." Jake dismissed it quickly. "Maybe it was a bear, or you were dreaming or something." But his nervous glances toward the forest betrayed him, and neither of them spoke about it again as they hiked out to explore the trails. When they returned to camp at dusk, what they found sent chills through both of them. The campsite was trashed. Their food was shredded into unrecognizable scraps. Their tent had been slashed along one side, the edges smooth as though they'd been cut with surgical precision. No tracks or paw prints surrounded the site, no sign that anything or anyone had been there. And then there was the symbol. Burned deep into a flat rock near the fire pit was a triangle, an eye at its center. The lines were too perfect, too deliberate, as though seared in by something far beyond human hands. "We didn't do that, did we?" Jake asked, his voice quiet, his laugh weak. Ethan shook his head, though something deep in his chest twisted. The symbol felt familiar, though he couldn't place why. And the more he looked at it, the more his head throbbed, pulsing pain beneath his temples, as though the symbol itself was digging into his thoughts. They sat by the fire that night, knives close, trying to convince themselves it was a prank. They laughed too loud, their voices too forced, as though the noise alone could banish the suffocating tension pressing in from the woods. But the laughter stopped when the footsteps began. It was subtle at first, a branch snapping here, a crunch of leaves there, but soon it became deliberate, circling, slow, calculated. Not one pair of footsteps, but many. Jake shouted into the darkness, but only silence followed. And then, as the fire burned low, something stepped into the light. Both men froze. It wasn't human. It didn't even try to be. Its form was a living void, devoid of texture or color, darker than the deepest shadows. Its edges rippled and quivered, as if barely containing a monstrous rhythm beneath its surface. And where its face should have been, There was only a suggestion of embers, the faintest, jagged grin of razor-thin teeth. Jake lunged with a yell, his knife gleaming in the firelight, but the moment he moved, the fire snuffed out. The two of them scrambled in the pitch black, clawing for their gear as fear drove them toward the trail. Behind them, the sound of the hum grew louder, pulsing in their ears and chests. They didn't stop running until the forest gave way to the empty stillness of the parking lot where their car waited. They didn't talk about it after that night, not until weeks later. Jake ignored Ethan's calls, and when Ethan finally drove 3 hours to check on him, Jake was gone. His apartment was empty, the mailbox overflowing. No one had seen him. And then the nightmares started. At first, Ethan chalked it up to stress, but his cat's behavior, the way it hissed at shadows in the corners of the room, felt too familiar. Then came the smell, faint hints of rot and metal wafting through the apartment. One night, as Ethan drifted to sleep, a low hum stirred him awake. It was barely there, a whisper on the edge of hearing. When he looked toward the frosted window, his heart stopped dead in his chest. Imprinted faintly in the frost, as though burned by invisible hands, was the same triangle with the eye. Ethan moved across the state shortly after, but deep down, he knows the truth. Whatever followed them from the Smoky Mountains didn't stop with Jake. It's still waiting, it's always watching, and sooner or later, it will come for him again. If this story made you think twice about hiking in the Smoky Mountains, hit the like button and subscribe for more chilling tales of the unexplained. And remember, when the wild goes silent, stay where it's safe. Something might be watching from the shadows, waiting.